Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. Um, it's unfortunate that we can't be in person. I really want to actually leave my house, but this will have to suffice. I'm sure I will be out there sooner rather than later. Mary mentioned that I think I'm correct, Mary. We have a miniature horse group primarily. Am I correct? I unmuted you so you could tell me.
This is the Arizona Miniature Horse Club.
Fantastic. I didn't want to start talking about draft horses or minis if it was the wrong way around. So let me just make sure we've got the right crowd. Oh, and I think Mary on the phone actually got on. That's fantastic. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar. We are going to talk about digestive function. In particular, we're going to really focus on some of the problems that occur in the equine digestive system. I know that you've asked that we talk about gastric ulcers and hindgut ulcers, so we will definitely talk about those. But really, in order to answer your questions on how to fix the horse, we have to understand what is normal for the horse. There's no way to fix it if we don't know what we've got to go back to. So we will discuss the basic digestive function of a horse and what is normal for a horse. And so on the left-hand side, now I know that these are large horses, but you can just shrink their size like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, and it's still the same information for miniature horses. So horses are designed to eat a wide variety of different fibers. They eat constantly throughout the day. They eat about 17 hours out of the day, and we literally call them trickle feeders because they have a small amount of nutrients constantly trickling through their digestive system. They live in herds, and we all know some horses get really anxious when they're away from their buddy, and that's just a natural instinct that is bred into them because they are herd animals. They also move around while they eat. And I understand some of the issues that we have with miniature horses. We run into the problem with obesity very often, but this kind of management and this evolution still stands for miniature horses, that they are meant to still continually graze. Horses eat from the ground, and when they eat off the ground, and I don't mean eat off the sand or the dirt, but in the wild they do. In our situation, I want you to put a tub on the ground, but they eat off the ground, and that encourages natural drainage of the respiratory tract. It increases chewing time. It prevents muscular tension in the neck and back, and it also maintains proper teeth alignment. Unfortunately, though, we tend to hang buckets on the wall because it's more convenient for us. And so our horses are more likely to eat at chest height. And that decreases that teeth alignment and it decreases chewing time. And when you chew, what do you produce? Saliva. What does saliva do? It lubricates the throat and it also buffers the stomach. So as we go through this presentation of all the things that we kind of have gone away from that are normal for horses and all of the things that we do for our own convenience, we start to check some boxes as to why we have created problems like gastric ulcers. Horses in the wild do not get gastric ulcers. It is 100% man-made and because of us. But knowing that, we can correct it. We can correct some of our management so that we can alleviate these problems. But we also feed our horses a cereal grain based diet because we're expecting them to live longer. Horses in the wild maybe live till they're 7 to 12 years old, and we expect our horses to live until they're 30 and have 4 or 5 different careers and be sound and happy in all of those careers. So um, we have to feed our horses differently. We also expect them to do a whole lot more work than they would have done in the wild. In the wild, they ran away occasionally from predators, and if there was enough food available, they would have a baby, but that's about all they did. And so our modern horses sometimes really get stressed because of the confinement. They get frustrated because we put them in stalls by themselves. They have lack of socialization. So there's ways that you can just change the dynamics of your stalls so that they can see each other and hear each other, and that can decrease stress. Um, Exercise level, we have all over the place. We have some horses that are really therapy for us, and we just look at them and that makes us feel better, but they don't do any exercise. And then we have other horses that exercise very heavily. But ultimately, what I would like everybody to do is to go home and put a feed bucket on the ground. Now, I know if you live in a sandy area, I don't want my horse to eat off the ground. I don't want them to get sand colic, but we're not advocating that. I just want a tub on closer to the ground so that we can mimic that natural feeding position. If you look at the way the horse's teeth actually work, these pictures on the side, these funny looking lines, that's looking up from the ground at the muzzle of the horse and how the bottom jaw actually works, because we know it works in an independent motion. And so when a horse eats pellets or grain or anything with a really short fiber length, they're going to have a much shorter, what we call jaw sweep or chew motion. When they're eating long stem hay or grass, they have a much wider jaw sweep or jaw motion. And when they have that really wide jaw sweep, they evenly wear their teeth. So what we find is horses that are only eating pelleted forage or only eating grain, they have really poor dental wear and they end up getting hooks on the outside and poor enamel. When a horse has access to pasture just to graze continually, they would chew about 60,000 times a day. When we put a horse, now I'm basing this on an 1,100-pound horse, but the percentages still are the same. But okay, for an 1,100-pound horse, if we say that we feed them 1.5% of their body weight, we're looking at feeding 15, 16 pounds of hay per day. They'll chew that about 25,000 times. And then if we added in 6 pounds of oats to that horse's diet, they're going to chew that about 2,500 times. So if we increase that to 12 pounds of oats because they were really thin and they were lactating, they were going to chew that 5,000 times. So if we add the 5,000 and the 25,000, we've got 30,000 chews that a horse would do standing in a stall eating what we provided it for the day. So you've cut in half the amount of chews that a horse does. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about a Shire, a thoroughbred, or a miniature horse. They still have a minimum fiber requirement that they need to meet each day, and it's typically around 1.5%. When a person chokes, their windpipe, their breathing pipe is also kind of blocked. But when a horse chokes, they can still breathe, but the concern is that they will cough and cough and cough to get rid of that whatever's lodged in their throat, and they will aspirate that. They'll swallow that back down into their lungs and get a secondary pneumonia. If we want to decrease our horse's risk for choking, we need to put the tub on the ground. You need to slow them down as much as you can. Put a rock in their feed tub. And this becomes very difficult when we have horses on a kind of a restricted diet because they're overweight. We're feeding smaller quantities, but we still have to find a way to be able to feed them, mimic that grazing behavior and stretch that out. So if we look at the digestive system, you can see that the stomach is really small in relation to the rest of the digestive system. And it's got a transit time from when the horse takes a mouthful of food to when it passes through the stomach. Can take as long as 2 hours, but typically it only takes about 30 minutes for food to pass through the stomach. So it doesn't sit in there very long. There are two sections to the stomach. If I cut a window in the stomach and let you look inside, there's this top section that I call the non-protected region, but if you want to get fancy, you can call it the squamous mucosa. And the bottom section I call the protected region. Again, if you want to be fancy, you can call it the glandular mucosa. And there's a line right between those two called the margo plicatus. And you can see in my actual photograph, there is kind of a little bump or a ridge between those two sections. That dark pink tissue down the bottom is protected by the slippery, slimy mucus coating that protects that tissue from acid that is secreted continually by cells in that region of the stomach. And that is a natural part of horses' digestion. They bite, they nip it off, and then they grind it with their teeth and they mix it with saliva. And the saliva has certain enzymes in it, which will start to break down those food particles. Then it gets swallowed down into the stomach, and the acid in the stomach continues to break down that food. That is normal. But if you think about a horse in the wild, they're continually chewing. So they're continually producing saliva, which buffers that stomach acid. And they're also continually swallowing food, which dilutes that stomach acid. So gastric ulcers are never a big deal. But unfortunately, what we do is we meal feed them. Usually that's based on our convenience because we have to go to work or take the kids to school or whatever it is. So we feed them in the morning, and within 30 minutes, it's out of the stomach. It's going to hang out in the hindgut much longer, but within 30 minutes, it could be out of the stomach. And then they're just waiting for you to come back in the afternoon. And that acid builds up and builds up and builds up in the bottom part of the stomach, and then it splashes up onto that non-protected region of squamous mucosa. And that's primarily where we see gastric ulcers, is right above that line. So in the DAC range, what supplements have we created to help with this problem? So the most recent product that we have is called DAC Prebuff, and it's calcium and an amino acid threonine, but it's primarily calcium. And the source of calcium is calcite. So if any of you are familiar with the marketing from Purina, you've heard of Outlast. Outlast is a marine-derived calcium source. Well, it's the exact same calcium that we put in the Prebuff. It's a marine-derived calcium. It's called calcite. It's actually from fossilized red algae. And what makes this type of calcium much more useful to the horse is the structure. If you look at it under a microscope, it actually looks like a honeycomb. And so if you think about every surface area that an object has coming in contact with the acid in the horse's stomach enables it to buffer better, versus if you just put a solid rock, it's just got one surface area, one solid surface area. You just plop that into the horse's stomach and the acid only can touch the outside. So the surface area is really small. But now if you put a honeycomb structure that's got lots of different surface areas, and the actual combined surface area of that structure is much, much larger. So we have much greater buffering capacity. So what the Prebuff is designed for, when I put this together, it's literally a pre-workout immediate gastric bufferer. So it will buffer that stomach acid immediately. There's no like you have to get your horse used to it. And it's really not going to do anything towards healing or tissue benefit, but all it does is buffer that stomach acid. So you're putting your horse in a stressful situation. I'm putting him on the trailer. I'm putting a new horse out with him. I'm taking him to a show. The veterinarian's coming and he hates the vet. He doesn't like the farrier. Whatever it is, you can give Prebuff 30 minutes to 2 hours prior to that stressful event, and it will immediately buffer that stomach acid, and it'll take it from being really, really strong. And you can see in this kind of blurry graph down here, I'll show you another slide that makes it easier to understand this, but we measure acid in the stomach with the unit of pH, just like you measure weight with pounds. You measure acid with the units of pH. And a pH of 1 is a really, really strong acid. That's going to burn your finger. 7 is neutral. That's water. So we consider the acid in the stomach to be buffered and safe when it's above a 4. And so you can see here the 4, I don't know whether you can see where my pointer is, but where that blue kind of light blue rectangle starts, that is the pH of 4. And you can see pretty much immediately at giving the Prebuff, within 5 minutes, stomach acid goes from being a 2 to above a 4. So within 5 minutes, you can mitigate that negative effects of that strong acid. So the Prebuff is more of a preventative. It's not, oh, my horse has ulcers, I'm going to feed it Prebuff and that's going to fix it. No, this is a preventative. This is what we use after we've corrected those ulcers. about 90% of performance horses, exercising horses, period, have gastric ulcers. About 60% have them in the hindgut. About half the population have them in both regions. And I would suspect that these values are much, much higher now. This research was done back in 2005. What causes gastric ulcers? It's our management. We're fasting them, we're meal feeding them, we're feeding them more grains. They don't get enough forage because they're not out there just constantly self-regulating. We transport them, we stable them, we put them through exercise, and then they get hurt. So we give them bute, which is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, and they just have this chronic pain. So we give them bute long term. And the reason why we don't do that is because the bute actually will wear away at that mucus coating that I said is in the bottom of the stomach that protects it. What will you notice in your horse? Oh, behavior changes immediately. You're feeding them and they're not gaining weight. The coat is poor. When you, obviously you're not riding miniature horses, but when maybe you're asking them to move off pressure, they are really uncomfortable in their sides. When you're grooming them, they're really uncomfortable. But you take a horse that's been sweet and gentle, and now it's a rabid animal, and usually that's a sign of gastric ulcers. So this was an interesting study where they actually put a little probe down in the horse's stomach. It was something they swallowed, and it measured the acidity, the pH. And this is what, over a 24-hour period, it looked like in the stomach when they took away all feed and hay. They only let them drink water, and you can see that this blue spikes here that go above that yellow line, which is the pH of 4. That's when they took drinks of water. But after taking the feed away, immediately, pretty much immediately, within 30 minutes, the acid plummets to between a 1 and a 2, which is super strong. And it stays there for the 24-hour period that they do not have anything to eat. Within 1 hour, as I mentioned, it's really, really strong, and that's going to start causing damage. By 18 hours, these horses had bleeding lesions. By just 6 hours of your horse not having anything to eat, we saw reddening of the stomach lining. What is reddening? It's inflammation. What comes after inflammation is that tissue starts to debride and get damaged and have those kind of ulcers, those ulcerative pockets. What's not uncommon, especially when we're in the winter months, which is when gastric ulcers seem to get worse, and it's darker at night, so we're feeding them earlier, and we're not coming out to the barn until later in the morning because it's dark and cold and no one wants to get up. So we maybe feed them between 5 and 7 at night and not coming back till 7 to 8 in the morning. That's a 10 to 12-hour window where they don't have anything in their stomach. From the last mouthful of food, 30 minutes later, can be out of the stomach. So I like to, if you don't have the option of doing a night check and throwing in a handful of hay, then I like to use slow feeders, anything you can do to try and mimic that grazing behavior. And I know that with miniature horses, it's very difficult because 1.5% of their body weight is 1 flake of hay or less a day. And it just is so difficult to spread that out. But we really need to find a way to do that because that is going to be your number one way to mitigate gastric ulcers. When it comes to what should I be feeding my horse, well, alfalfa is high in calcium, and that's a natural calcium that helps to buffer that stomach acid. And so we recommend that immediately, if you're not adding alfalfa to your horse's diet, because let's just say it's got too many calories and we don't want our mini to get too fat, so we don't feed him alfalfa. If you're not just doing it as his hay, you could get a bag of alfalfa pellets and literally use them as treats and just give him a half a handful prior to you exercising him. And what that will do is instantaneously buffer the stomach acid. If you really still don't want to do that, that's what the Prebuff is for. You can give the Prebuff immediately prior to exercise, and it's going to buffer that stomach acid. So when it comes to correcting the damage caused by stomach and hindgut ulcers, we look at a product called coolgut. Again, it's got that marine-derived calcium, the calcite. It's got other ingredients like L-glutamine, which is an amino acid, and that's going to help with tissue integrity, like all the cells along the lining of the gut. It helps to feed those. It's got yeast in it, the Saccharomyces cerevisiae, which helps to buffer the hindgut acid. All right. Now, stomach acid can be buffered by calcium, the calcite, but that's not going to help the hindgut. So we want to have the yeast, which is going to buffer the hindgut acid. And then it's got some prebiotics, the FOS and MOS, that are going to help bind bad bacteria, increase fiber digestion, DHA, which is a powerful omega-3 fatty acid, and that helps with inflammation. We've also got some whey protein and some glycine that also help with the lining of the gut. So where the Prebuff really just buffers stomach acid, the coolgut helps to feed the cells in the gut to heal them. So if we move on to the small intestine comes after the stomach, and it's like a big long garden hose, and there are enzymes in here now that are going to break down the food, and we're supposed to be absorbing our carbohydrates. Our sugars and starches should be absorbed here in the small intestine, and it's why we want to make sure that we're feeding processed grains. If we're feeding grains to horses like corn or oats or barley, we want to make sure that they're processed so that those starch molecules can be broken down here in the small intestine and not overflow into the hindgut, which is the next part of the digestive system where it's not meant to go, to cause all those kind of colic and diarrhea. So when we're feeding horses grains, we need to make sure that they're digested, they're broken down, they're steam flaked, they're micronized, anything. When it comes to oats, that's the only grain that you don't have to break down first, because oats have that fibrous seed coat that already make them safer to feed. And the starch molecules in oats are pretty loose anyway, so it's easier for them to digest and break down. So this graph is just looking at the small intestine digestibility of different ingredients that are not processed. So very poor digestion of something like corn or rice or barley. But when you look at oats or triticale, which is wheat, they have much higher digestibility in the small intestine, much safer to feed. So then we go from here on back, we call this the hindgut of the horse, and it starts with the cecum. And the cecum is a blind sac, and it's full of microbes and bacteria that continue to break down fiber, and they create B vitamins, keep the horse healthy. That Saccharomyces cerevisiae is going to work back here to help these bacteria stay in the correct acidity range. The large colon, now it can take 35 to 65 hours for food to pass through the large colon, so much, much longer than the stomach. But it's much, much harder to break down the most important part of the horse's diet, which is the fiber. It's easy for gas to build up. If we get those bacteria out of balance, they'll create excess gas, and then we'll have these gas pockets, and they can twist and turn, and that can be gas colic. So we really want to keep this hindgut healthy. So we have the microbes, they chew. Also, the hindgut is full of microbes and yeast and all kinds of different bacteria that we call the microbiome. And they break down fiber, the hay, the grass, and they create things called volatile fatty acids. And those volatile fatty acids are used for energy. They create B vitamins and vitamin K. They create proteins and amino acids, but they also make gas, which is wasted energy. And if we get them out of balance, or we give them ingredients they shouldn't be eating, like high cereal grains, sugars and starches, they produce a lot more gas. And what can you do daily to help hindgut health? Just to maintain the basic digestive health is the DAC digestive feed additive. It's got prebiotics and probiotics. It's got the yeast in there. It's got integral, which is a mycotoxin binder. So mycotoxins are the toxins that come from some molds, and we know that horses are super sensitive to different molds, and they're mycotoxins. So we want to make sure we can bind those up. The yeast is going to help with hindgut acidity, help with that hindgut acidosis. The rescue aid is another product that I get asked about quite frequently, and it is just bacteria and yeast. It doesn't have the mycotoxin binder in it, the integral. So it's not necessarily something that I feed every day, but if I have a sick horse that's or someone that I know gets quite stressed when we take him places and we give him some Prebuff, but you can use the rescue aid powder if we just want to kind of help maintain that bacterial population. If a horse has colic surgery, for example, and has been on antibiotics or is on antibiotics for any reason, we know that antibiotics pretty much kill everything. And so using the rescue aid to help repopulate those bacteria can be very beneficial. So we look at colonic ulcers. This is a picture of that hindgut tissue that's damaged. It's got all these this poor these sores and lesions on it. And hindgut ulcers are really we have intermittent colic-like symptoms. They're lethargic. They lose weight. We've got all kinds of bacteria that live back here, good and bad. And so now we can get a fever because those bacteria kind of get into those sores, and this tissue is meant to absorb water. And so if that tissue is damaged, the horses will get dehydrated. And any animal that has diarrhea, you also worry about dehydration. What can you do for these horses? Well, if you have a horse that's got chronic um, diarrhea and we're concerned about colonic issues and hindgut issues and not gaining weight, then I would put them on pelleted or cubed forage for about 3 to 4 weeks. And as we get some shorter, softer grass, we could slowly allow them to graze on that using ingredients that have the yeast, like the rescue aid or the DDA, and also the coolgut, because it's got the omega-3 fatty acids in it. All of these will help that hindgut tissue. So I mentioned the coolgut, and for the hindgut, it's going to really help with that tissue integrity. The small colon is what we have next, and it is just going to absorb more moisture and any non-digested feed material. It's usually non-digested fiber is going to get turned into fecal balls. So there's a couple of other pastes that are in our digestive health range. So we have a probiotic paste, and again, I do this when I have a horse that maybe has been on antibiotics and I just really want to repopulate all of the bacteria. The rescue aid paste is something that I use. I use that for 14 days. I use 1 tube a day when we have horses that have chronic diarrhea and don't seem to be responding to anything else. Potentially there is an issue with leaky gut. So these intestinal cells that line the intestinal wall are supposed to, between them, there's what we call gates, tight junctions really, but they're gates. And when you have food particles that have been broken down enough, those gates are going to open and they're going to be absorbed into the bloodstream and go off and do their job. But what we find when horses are really stressed, from whether it be heat or exercise or change in diet or whatever it is, we can see this problem called leaky gut, and we see it in people too, where those gates are just cracked open constantly. And so we have non-digested food particles and toxic material constantly flowing into the bloodstream. So the rescue aid paste has butypearl Z in it. It's butyric acid, which is a volatile fatty acid that those microbes make, and zinc. And those two together really help to mend those gates so that now we can close those gates properly and not have all this toxic material flowing into the bloodstream. But again, that is one that I use for 14 days. I use it 1 tube a day. So for a miniature horse, I would use half a tube a day. So you'd only need 7 tubes, but you still do it for 14 days. We kind of come back and we circle back to what is the most important part of the horse's diet, and that is the forage. And feeding your horse enough forage, that's going to go a long way for correcting digestive health. So an absolute bare minimum of hay or fiber that a horse needs to eat per day is 1% of their body weight. So for a 250-pound horse, that would be 2.5 pounds per day, absolute bare minimum. I don't usually feed a horse that little. If I have a horse on a weight loss program, I'm going to feed them 1.2% of their body weight. So for a 1,000-pound horse, we're looking at 12 pounds of hay. For a 250-pound horse, we're looking at 3 pounds of hay per day that you have to stretch out through the day. So I always say that what we consider an easy keeper, because they don't need to eat much to maintain their weight, that's actually really hard for me to manage. So I want to call those hard keepers, because it's really hard for me to manage them. And in general, minis are hard to manage because we're feeding such small quantities, and we've got to find a way to stretch it out. I mentioned earlier that 1.5 to 2.5% is more typical. But if we do that on a 250-pound horse, we're looking at 3.3¼ pounds to, do my math here. I'm terrible at math, so I have to do it in 3¼ to 3¾ to 6¼ pounds of hay per day. That'd be 1.5 to 2.5% of body weight on that 250-pound horse. So you need to find a way to stretch it out. If we're looking at how much hay will your horse need, typically on the East Coast here, I've worked this out over a 5-month period, because most people do have some access to grass, but you're really looking at a 12-month period because your horses are eating hay year round. So whilst I know a lot of people on the West Coast do use a lot of pelleted or cubed forage sources, they consume those very quickly. And when it's eaten, then they're not producing saliva because they're not chewing. So I don't like to feed horses, unless they have no teeth, 100% pelleted forage. I want to feed them some long stem hay. And then if it's convenient spaced, or it's easier to get, or it's easier to store, or we're improving the quality of the hay, we can add in some pelleted or cubed forage, but I really don't like to feed it at 100%. So this is a study I wanted to share on what happens if you don't feed enough hay to horses, or fiber to horses. So we've got ponies that were fed at 3 different rates, either pretty much half a percent, 0.5% of their body weight, 1.1% of their body weight. So let's say that's like our weight loss, 1.5 or 1.6% of body weight, and then their ad lib was about 2% of body weight. That's how much these ponies consumed if it was just in front of them all the time and they ate as much as they wanted. So you can see, if we look at the table, we've got our ad lib, which was 2% of body weight, we've got our 1.5, we've got our 1.1, and then we've got our 0.6% of body weight. And you can look, the column on the right shows the actual digestibility. So they were all fed the same hay. But when you any quality, even the best quality hay is only about 50% digestible. So the first 3 showed that, right? You feed them 1.1% of their body weight to 1.5 to as much as they want. It's going to be about 50% digestible in their digestive system. If you feed less than that, if you feed, a really restrictive diet, 0.6% of their body weight, it was only 34% digestible. And I think what the authors suggested was you're actually, the digestive function is so decreased because the gut is actually dying, because it's not actively working. And so we really decrease the digestibility. So it's really not healthy for any horse, even if it's an overweight horse, to be on a very, very restrictive diet of 0.6% of their body weight. So with that, I'll take any questions.